The clansmen of Shao clan gazed at the two figures high up in the air. They looked incredibly awkward. The clansmen of Shao clan gazed at the two figures high up in the air. They looked incredibly awkward. Shao Sheng became a saint. And old man Shao went to the royal palace to personally request Queen Shao to give the young man another chance. All of which led to what happened just now. Many came to congratulate them. And yet, despite having become a saint, Yi Futian was still able to beat him. Up in the sky at that moment, blood continued to spill from Shao Sheng's mouth. Yi Futian's fist seemed to have punched right through his body. Shao Sheng's long hair and clothes, which were bloodstained, billowed. The people from Divine Cloud Valley were speechless as they watched the scene unfold. Do you confess? Yi Futian wanted a confession from Shao Sheng. He wanted to hear that the losing young man was guilty of those horrible actions. The relations between Xia Qingyuan and the Shao clan meant that she was unable to pull something that extreme if she did not have the evidence to back her claims. As such, Yi Futian came to see it through personally instead. There were no such restrictions between him and Shao Sheng. More than that, what Shao Sheng pulled twice prior was deemed unforgivable. Yi Futian's party almost perished during the Battle of Empty Realm, and they were only able to barely survive due to Yaya, his eldest brother, Yi Wuchen, and the others holding off their assailants by putting their lives on the line. The second time Shao Sheng's attempt on his life required the imperial advisor, and Yin Yuan to send him off, just so that he was able to leave Dali dynasty, getting the imperial advisor's residence embroiled in his matters. Yi Futian learned from Xia Qingyuan that the imperial advisor had resigned from his position as the chief of Dali Academy. Even the students of the imperial advisor left the academy to train elsewhere. The prince regent emerged again, and his powers seemed to be about to eclipse those of the imperial advisor. King Tiandao and the prince regent became close allies, supporting the third prince to take the position of chief of the Dali Academy, taking charge of the academy that the imperial advisor had painstakingly built. Both figures were to be the third prince's advisors then. Many from Daily Mountain were even allowed to train in the Dali Academy. The imperial advisor would have definitely predicted those turn of events at the very moment he had decided to make a move for Yi Futian's sake. While Emperor Li would not have done anything to him simply because he let one person go, there was no way the emperor could just let everything slide. The imperial advisor was still a subject of Emperor Li's realm, one who played a crucial role in determining the outcome of the Battle of Empty Realm. In both attempts to take his life, someone from Emperor Xia's realm, Shao Sheng, had colluded with Li Yao, a prince of Emperor Li's realm. Such actions meant that even if Shao Sheng had truly confessed and repented, Yi Futian would still not have forgiven him, let alone that Shao Sheng had only become a saint. There were things that one could not merely let slide. Things that did not deserve to be forgiven. If it had not been for Queen Zhao's intervention before, Yi Futian would not have let the matter slide back then. All of that had nothing to do with one's state of mind or magnanimity. Shao Sheng, at that moment, looked at the silver-haired figure right in front of him, the figure that was basking in holy brilliance. At that moment, Shao Sheng felt as if Yi Futian was the saint while he was the sage. Despite having become a saint, Shao Sheng was still unable to beat him, and any talk of besting him in the future was now pointless. Do I confess then? He wondered. While Shao Sheng had not done anything himself, he was still involved in those incidents. It was due to him that the attempts at Yi Futian's life came to be. Seeing how Shao Sheng was looking at him without saying anything, Yi Futian lifted his arm and sent a burst of dazzling sword wool through Shao Sheng's body without hesitation. The force raged throughout Shao Sheng's body, making him shudder throughout. His face was ashen. He continued to look at Yi Futian, who then threw punches at him. Every single punch worsened his condition, as the powers of the punches ravaged his internal organs. Countless who were watching below were shaken at that scene. Yi Futian was taking care of things his way. If you're not going to confess, I'll keep doing it my way until you yield, Yi Futian said. His voice was cold and overbearing. Even the ones below came to be confused about what was going on. Who among the two was the saint again? Who among the two was the sage again? Yi Futian was truly ravaging Shao Sheng's will by then. Boom! Another punch landed, and Xiao Sheng's body seemed to have been penetrated. He looked very wobbly. Not only did his aura feel shriveled, but it also seemed as if his spirit and vital signs were quickly disappearing. It was only then that Xiao Sheng realized that until Yi Futian got the answer he sought, there was no stopping what was going on. Enough! A voice was ringing throughout the air. Many looked at the one who spoke, and saw old man Xiao step forward with cold eyes, looking at Yi Futian. Yi Futian, are you going to use such means to make him confess to something he didn't do? Old man Xiao asked coldly. If he truly is innocent, I shall be willing to pay the price with my life. But if he truly is guilty, what will you do then? Yi Futian glanced at old man Xiao and answered in an equally cold tone. Old man Xiao understood from Yi Futian's eyes that he was sure that Xiao Sheng was behind all those attempts on his life. Only through a transformation of one's mind, reaching completion and flawlessness, can one achieve sainthood in one's training in the great path. Xiao Sheng has been of such a state of mind, as he was able to make it into sainthood. How can you be so sure that he was the one behind all of that? Old man Xiao asked again. After Xiao Sheng was able to make it to Saint Plain, the old man came to think that he might have been wrong, and had misunderstood Xiao Sheng. The princess was unable to find out anything after all. They had restricted Xiao Sheng's mobility, and yet what followed still happened, which meant that Xiao Sheng could not have been the one behind it all. Even some things that happened before could not have been pulled off by Xiao Sheng, judging by the resources he had at his disposal. Flawless state of mind? Yi Futian chuckled sarcastically and continued. While I have no idea why he had been able to let go of his obsession and make the breakthrough, there were multiple ways of breaking into Saint Plain. Even if he had truly been able to let go, that does not mean that he did not do any of those things. You claimed that he was of a flawless state of mind? What about me then? The holy light on and around Yi Futian turned even more dazzling as soon as he finished. He threw yet another devastating punch, rattling Xiao Sheng's internal organs so severely that they were almost shattered. Xiao Sheng looked even more broken. At that same time, Yi Futian's aura intensity climbed to a critical point, and beams of glittering light shot to the heavens. It brought forth a terrifying, stifling aura all of a sudden. It was as if a storm was brewing. The hearts of many were shaken furiously. The beams of light shot to the heavens, and his will seemed to have merged with the great path. His mind seemed to have melded with the world around him. Yi Futian looked up to the sky and said with a brimming voice, I now ask the heavens, is my conscience clear? His voice resonated with his surroundings. Countless heard that voice throughout the vast space. Many outside the Xiao clan's manor gathered around. They looked up at that figure in the sky, at the silver-haired man, who was a sage, yet had bested a saint. Catastrophic clouds rolled about above him. Beams of the divine light of calamity ebbed in the heavens. Black clouds filled the sky, and the scene looked like doomsday. Stifling pressure shrouded the entire place. Old man Xiao looked up. His gaze was fixed on the scene unfolding midair. I now ask the heavens, is my conscience clear? The catastrophe of the great path could not have been evoked if one's state of mind was patchy. Xiao Sheng looked up in the sky at the terrifying might of the gathering catastrophe, which proved even more powerful than the one that he had braved through. He grinned all of a sudden. Yi Futian, a sage, had bested him, a saint. The catastrophe of the great path was evoked soon after, giving the one who bested him a chance to break into the Saint Plain. It was an irony like no other. He had thought himself a truly changed man from head to toe when he broke into Saint Plain, enabling him to start anew. Yet there was someone who refused to let him do so. The one who refused proved to be better. So much better that there had never been one such person emerging in history throughout all of Emperor Xia's realm. Yi Futian used him as a catalyst to break into the Saint Plain. I, Xiao Sheng, have broken into Saint Plain, but so what? He thought. What he did in the past were things he would have never do again with his current state of mind. Yet so what? The fact that he had done all those things remained unchanged. Yi Futian kept his eyes on Xiao Sheng and said, I led Emperor Xia's realm to victory in the Battle of Empty Realm, yet someone wanted to see me dead. After the Battle of Empty Realm, I went to Dali Dynasty to train, and the imperial advisor of Dali imparted his ways to me, teaching me the ways of the great path. Yet, Someone in Emperor Xiao's realm still wanted to see me dead. The imperial advisor knew that I was from Emperor Xiao's realm, and he escorted and sent me off back to the 9 states all the same. I would have died in Dali, and would have never made it here. Tell me, all of you, does that someone deserve death? Violent clouds of the catastrophe rolled in increasingly great intensity. Even those who watched from outside were shaken to their core. The catastrophe was truly powerful. All of them seemed to have sensed all manners of the might of the great path imbued within. It was as if the catastrophe would bring about doom below as soon as it rained. What Futian said, however, proved even more earth-shattering. His methods were actually imparted to him by the imperial advisor of Dali. He went to Dali dynasty to train, and the imperial advisor took him in. His identity was discovered, and the imperial advisor escorted him to Emperor Xiao's realm. It was surprising enough that the imperial advisor of Dali dynasty would have gone to such extents for him. Yet someone in Emperor Xiao's realm wanted to see him dead. Some irony indeed. All of them seemed to be able to understand what Futian had gone through. It was of no surprise that he went on to ask the heavens if his conscience was clear. If Xiao Sheng had truly been the one doing all of that, then he truly deserved death. All of them understood why Futian had come in such a forceful manner to take Xiao Sheng. Anyone can come to vouch for him, and still, I will not yield, Futian said coldly. Xiao Sheng looked at him, and then at the sky. One could have only guessed what was going through his mind right there. He closed his eyes and opened them again, sighing before saying, I am indeed guilty. The world turned completely silent in that instant, with only the catastrophe continuing to howl. Xiao Sheng confessed to his crimes. Everyone looked up into the sky. Dark clouds were gathering, making everything more and more frightening. The light of catastrophe was falling from the heavens. Everyone looked up into the sky. Dark clouds were gathering, making everything more and more frightening. The light of catastrophe was falling from the heavens. Futian's light of catastrophe seemed to consist of many different colors. Layer upon layer of will was immersed in the light, as a terrible brilliance flowed out from him. But he still stood there like a statue. In front of him, Xiao Sheng was doing the same. And he had admitted his fault. He had admitted everything. Xiao Sheng had broken through to the divine path, and the Xiao clan had pleaded to Queen Xiao for his life. They were ready to send him to the army to train. Many guests had come to see him off, and his future was very bright. But the most dazzling figure in the past few years in Emperor Xiao's realm had come to criticize him. As a sage, he had still been able to crush Xiao Sheng, who was at the saint level, and forcibly break through to the divine catastrophe. The people of the Xiao clan went pale. They had wanted to fight for a future for Xiao Sheng. Since he had entered the saint plane, his heart must have changed, and he would very likely become one of the most prestigious figures of their clan in the future. Thus, old man Xiao had once again placed all his hopes upon him. But now they all understood. Xiao Sheng was finished. Everyone had heard what Futian had just said very clearly. He had worked with people from Emperor Li's realm twice all to kill Futian, who had achieved victory in the Battle of Empty Realm, and gone by himself to Emperor Li's realm. This was an unforgivable offense. Even Xia Qingyuan could not let him get away with this. And neither could Futian. The people from Divine Cloud Valley also looked up into the air. Gongsun and I, Gongsun Zhong, and the rest were all conflicted. They still remembered the first time they had seen Futian. It was in the Xiao clan's household, at Old Man Zhao's banquet. At that time, he had only recently arrived in the upper worlds, and had just made a name for himself. He had launched a surprise attack on Lihan Heaven, which made everyone think he was too arrogant, and did not know his own power. He had provoked Lihan Heaven, and had swept away all their heroes at that banquet. Afterward, he had set out on a path that no others could match. On the 33rd layer of Lihan Heaven, he had defeated Wang Chuan. Wang Chuan had used this battle to become a saint, but he said that Futian stood alone among those below the saint plane. Afterward, in the Battle of Empty Realm, he had seized victory all by himself, and then had joined with Princess Xia Qingyuan to defeat Yuan Jin. The swordmaster of Lihan had given his sword to Yi Wuchen because of him, to save him from an attack by cultivators of Emperor Li's realm. And now, He had defeated a saint-level cultivator as a sage, accomplishing a feat for the ages, and now was using the majesty of this battle to step onto the divine path. Those who had been called the greatest figure below the Saint Plane in Emperor Xia's realm, those dazzling, unparalleled heroes seemed to lose their luster before him. He seemed to be the only person who mattered in that generation of cultivators from Emperor Xia's realm. He was absolutely without equal, and eclipsed everyone else's glory. No one could compare with him. Some people looked at Princess Xia Qingyuan not far away. Once, it had been said that she stood alone in her generation, and that none could compare with her. But now, what about Yi Futian? Could he stand shoulder to shoulder with the princess? At that moment, everyone understood what Xia Qingyuan had seen in Yi Futian, and why she appreciated him. Perhaps Xia Qingyuan and Emperor Xia had known of Yi Futian's talent from the start. Even the imperial advisor, who was from an enemy power, treated him like this. A truly outstanding figure could perhaps make those who stood before him give up their own status. This was sincere appreciation. It did not matter whether or not they stood in opposition to him. Boom! A rumbling sound pulled everyone back from their reveries. The light of catastrophe was falling from the sky and crashed violently upon Yi Futian. His white hair was dancing in the wind as his white robes fluttered. The brilliant light around him became even brighter as the light of catastrophe flowed across his body. But he still stood up straight without wavering even a little bit. His body was not moved even an inch. With a start, many people realized that not only was terrible will flowing around Yi Futian, but his flesh itself was also suffused with a powerful will. The terrifying light of catastrophe baptized his spiritual willpower and changed it. At that same time, it baptized his flesh, making it divine. In front of him, Xiaosheng was also suffering the waves of the divine catastrophe. His weak flesh trembled, and he spat up another mouthful of blood. His face was as white as paper. Xiaosheng's breathing was growing weaker and weaker. He looked at the impossibly brilliant figure before him, and felt a burst of sorrow. If he had known it would turn out like this, he would not have done the things he did. That way, the incomparably brilliant Yi Futian would have had nothing to do with him. He could still have become a saint. Given his status, he could have done anything that he wanted to. Princess Xiao and Xia Qingyuan would have promised him anything. Why had he decided to compete with Yi Futian and worry that he would steal his position? Now he understood that there were some things you should not strive for, as to do so would be meaningless. It was only a momentary slip, but it had made it so that there was no way to escape, and had led him to this point. He felt sort of pitiable. He naturally understood that Yi Futian would not give him another chance. He would do the same, regardless of his mood or his amount of tolerance. Who else? Yi Futian asked Xiaosheng. He naturally knew that Xiaosheng had not done all of this by himself. It was not something he could have done alone. Xia Qingyuan had told him always to watch Xiaosheng and the Xiao clan. She had even placed Xiaosheng under arrest. No news could have gotten out, so they could not know the news of his return. He trusted Xia Qingyuan, and so did not doubt what she had said. If it was not Xiaosheng, then there must have been someone controlling him from the background. Moreover, they were much more powerful than Xiaosheng. Otherwise, they would not have been able to get even a little bit of information. But everyone else trembled when they heard his question. There was someone else who had been involved in this besides Xiaosheng. Everyone involuntarily looked at the people from the Xiao clan. This had made Old Man Xiao, Xiao Qianhe, and the others look worried. This affair did not only concern Yi Futian. If it had just been him, they would not have cared so much. He had conspired with Emperor Li's realm to harm one of his own people. And it was someone that His Majesty and the princess regarded highly. Even someone from the Xiao clan could not get away with something like this. Qingyuan. Old Man Xiao looked at Xia Qingyuan and said, "I'm not that senile yet." The Xiao clan was at the height of power in Emperor Xia's realm. With the emperor as an in-law and Queen Xiao as the queen mother, their status was very high. Would he betray Emperor Xia's realm and collude with Dali dynasty? Obviously, he could not just sit still and take what Yi Futian was saying. It was too serious. That's not what he meant, grandfather. But you must understand that he could not have done this alone, said Xia Qingyuan. Old Man Zhao's eyes flashed when he heard this. When he had seen Xiaosheng become a saint, he had thought that Xia Qingyuan had been mistaken about him. But he did know that there were many things he could not do. But now, even Xiaosheng admitted that he had done this. Thinking about it in detail, it was apparent that someone else had to be involved. He swept his gaze over the people of the Xiao clan, then looked at Xiao Qianhe. The other person would have to be as bold as him, right? The light of catastrophe rumbled down yet again. Yi Futian was completely immersed in the divine catastrophe, and looked nearly celestial. However, the catastrophe of the divine path could not shake him one bit. He still stood up straight, calmly bearing its power like a god up in the sky. Everyone in the palace stared at him. They all knew that after becoming a saint, Yi Futian would undergo a change. In that past, his talent had been outstanding, but in the end, he had only been a junior, and so his power was limited. But after this change, he would truly come into his own. But at that moment, all Yi Futian wanted to know was the truth. Thus he questioned Xiaosheng about who else was involved. Xiaosheng suffered the waves of the divine catastrophe. He coughed up blood, then looked at Yi Futian, but his eyes seemed calm. He shook his head and said, "I did this by myself. I sent the information to Li Yao. I did all of it alone." Yi Futian looked at him, and saw that he did not look too distressed. It was as if he were still ready to face anything. He seemed sincere. Obviously, he did not want to say who had been backing him. Who was it? Xiaosheng had admitted his guilt, but was still protecting them. Was it someone from the Xiao clan? "You could not have done this alone," said Yi Futian coldly. "I said I did it alone." "If you don't believe me, that's fine," said Xiaosheng. He still would not confess. Yi Futian looked at him. Since Xiaosheng had already confessed, everything that would happen next was very simple. Saint Xihua had suddenly attacked the palace. Linger and Phoenix had been poisoned. His information had been leaked, including a lot of sensitive details. This was not something that Xiaosheng could have arranged all on his own. There must be someone extremely powerful in the background, controlling everything. This matter was not over. Up in the sky, the light of catastrophe burned brightly. Xia Qingyuan said, "You should become a saint first." Yi Futian nodded. His figure flashed up into the sky. Dark clouds covered everything, making an apocalyptic-looking scene. The divine catastrophe descended, and his spiritual willpower suffered a terrifying assault. But each assault baptized him in the great path. His will became one with heaven and earth, and he could sense will more clearly. That was not all. His body underwent powerful assaults as the light of catastrophe bathed his flesh, making him seem to transform. His flesh became divine. His whole body became the path. Everyone saw Yi Futian sitting there, cross-legged with eyes closed, bearing everything calmly. He was once baptized in medicine, and his spiritual will and physical body were extremely strong. There was no fear that he would not cross through the divine catastrophe. Everyone looked up at the white-robed youth sitting there. As the light of catastrophe fell upon him, his bearing changed little by little. In the end, he was like a butterfly breaking out of its cocoon. Divine light flowed from him and covered everything. Rays of morning sunlight filled the vast sky, dispersing the terrible light of catastrophe. The divine catastrophe grew weaker and weaker. The dark clouds dispersed, and morning sunlight came down from the ninth heaven. The white-haired youth opened his eyes. They were deeper than before, and divinity seemed to shoot out from them. He rose and looked out at the crowd. He was suffused with a supernatural aura. Yi Futian had become a saint. Yi Futian stood calmly in the sky, and with a single breath, he sucked in the qi of heaven and earth. Yi Futian stood calmly in the sky, and with a single breath, he sucked in the qi of heaven and earth. His heart and mind moved together, and could roam freely throughout heaven and earth. It was as if everything was moving in conjunction with his spirit. Although it was not as brilliant as before, divine light still flowed across his body. His flesh and his spirit had both undergone the baptism of the divine catastrophe, and had changed, becoming better than before. At that moment, he felt his body stabilize. His internal organs had become extremely powerful, and they quivered as he breathed. His limbs and bones were completely unobstructed, and he could see extremely far away with his naked eyes. In his life palace, the world tree swayed with divine radiance. The other life spirits curled around it, as if it was supporting them all. After all, the world tree was Yi Futian's original life spirit. The others had all grown out of it. Will float around the world tree, and in his life palace, Yi Futian could faintly feel it connecting with his thoughts. It seemed to be in both his body and his mind. The trunk of the world tree seemed to be his body, and it provided him with a constant stream of the breath of life and strength. Yi Futian felt like his life spirit had been set free, and could actually touch heaven and earth, turning into an incomparably holy tree that would touch the sky. Unfortunately, he had not truly released his full life spirit in combat as of yet. He was a saint. He had extraordinarily become a saint. This was a barrier. Most people were stopped by this barrier. Many people in the world of cultivators thought that advancing through the first 3 tiers of the saint plane was not as difficult as advancing from a sage to a saint. It was a huge test of one's character, and thus it was one of the most important steps. By taking this step, he had stepped over the barrier. From now on, he just had to steadily increase his level. Now that he had reached the saint plane, his state of mind had improved, so that he could break through even higher levels. This step was a huge change. From now on he would be advancing. Of course, crossing from the 3rd tier of the saint plane, flawless sainthood, to the 4th tier, the holiness of nirvana, was also an incredibly difficult step to take, and it prevented countless heroes from reaching the 4th tier. To break through to that plane, one needed a lot of luck and a lot of perseverance. After reaching the saint plane, Yi Futian felt much stronger than before. Even though it was only a single step, that single step had brought great changes. Divine radiance shot out from his eyes as he swept his gaze over Xiaosheng below him. Before starting on the divine path, he had already been able to defeat Xiaosheng. Now that he had become a saint, he could easily and swiftly crush him. He did not need to expend as much energy as he would have before. Even those below them could tell where Yi Futian and Xiaosheng stood in relation to each other. Even though they were both saints, the difference in their auras was great. If Xiaosheng was a supernatural saint and had completely changed, then Yi Futian was like a god who was even greater than a saint. They would never have thought that even after they had both become saints, there would be such a great difference between them. Everyone sighed inwardly. Perhaps this was truly a hero whose name would be heard around the world. Before taking that step, he had been able to crush Xiaosheng. Now that he had taken it, Xiaosheng could only despair. They even sort of felt that someone who had been a saint for many years would be crushed if they fought with Yi Futian, even though he had just become a saint. They even wondered about Yi Futian's family background. Could he truly be just a cultivator who had come from the lower worlds? Why would he be so outstanding? His aura was even more powerful than the juniors of the greatest houses of the upper worlds. There was even wonder in Xia Qingyuan's eyes as she beheld Yi Futian. He was truly dazzling right now. She wondered when she would be able to become a saint. She wondered what he would be like now that he was a saint. If he was like he was now, what would be the outcome? Everyone from the cottage looked on in reverent silence. Seeing his elegant demeanor, they all felt a burst of joy in their hearts. Their little brother had become a saint. Long ago, Yi Futian had come to the cottage at age 18, and was pampered by his sworn brothers and sisters. Now he had become a saint while he was still young. When he returned to the 9 states, he would stand at the peak and look down upon the whole world. It all seemed like a dream. He was a saint. He had attained what had once been unreachable. Now, after his sworn brother, he had finally taken this step. Now, he would not need Yu Sheng and the cottage to protect him anymore. He was the strongest disciple of the cottage now. Yi Futian, the saint, stepped forward, traversing the sky in a single step. He descended before Xiaosheng. Xiaosheng looked at him. At that moment, he felt unworthy to be in his presence. Once, he had been the heir of the Xiao clan, and Queen Zhao's niece. Therefore, even though Yi Futian was an outstanding talent, and was becoming famous throughout the upper worlds, he had not paid him any mind. He thought that by merely blocking his path he could get rid of him. Now looking back, he saw that the gap between them was huge. To become a saint was to be detached from the ordinary. However, Yi Futian's detachment had advanced by leaps and bounds, much faster than other people's. Even though no one knew what his family background was, he was in Emperor Xia's good graces, and the princess treated him favorably. As far as he knew, Xia Qingyuan had never treated anyone else like this. Even without this incident, Yi Futian would still not be comparable to him. Now, Yi Futian's future was limitless, and Xiao Sheng was a criminal. Maybe if he had seen things clearly before becoming a saint, this would not have happened. Who was it? Yi Futian asked coldly as he stared at Xiao Sheng. His voice carried an unmistakable meaning. Xiao Sheng may have confessed, but this matter was not over yet. Someone was helping him behind the scenes. The person who was secretly arranging all this from behind the scenes was no ordinary person. But he could not think of anyone other than Xiao Sheng, who hated him. I said that it was only me. Xiao Sheng stared calmly at Yi Futian. Even though he was in turmoil, he now saw many things clearly. It had all come to this, so he would confess. Since he had done all this, he would pay the price. He knew that even though he had become a saint, now that things had come to this point, he was finished. All his former glory had passed by like clouds of smoke. His cultivation and his future were gone now. Yi Futian grabbed Xiao Sheng, and in a flash, a terribly bolt of lightning descended towards him. It slammed into him, violently destroying his internal organs. Not only that, but his eyes became very sharp, and lightning will shot out of them into Xiao Sheng's eyes. At that moment, Xiao Sheng's brain trembled violently as his spiritual will came under serious attack. His whole body shook. He swayed as though he were about to fall, but he was held up by an invisible force. Xiao Sheng may have confessed that he had done everything, but if he wanted to hide anything else, it would not be that easy. Yi Futian would destroy his will. Having confessed to his crime, Xiao Sheng had no right to resist, and the Xiao clan had no right to question it. Below, everyone was looking at the two of them. They saw the terrible lightning flashing around the two of them. The lightning struck Xiao Sheng, destroying his flesh bit by bit and numbing his spiritual will. Who was it? Tell me. Yi Futian's voice was like thunder as he began to crack open Xiao Sheng's mind. His brain trembled fiercely, and it seemed that Yi Futian would completely destroy his will. A voice repeated over and over in his head, telling him to say who it was. Everyone was speechless. At this moment Xiao Sheng, who had no power resist, could truly be called wretched. But this was the price that he had to pay for everything he had done to Yi Futian. But everyone was still wondering if there was someone else with ill intentions towards Yi Futian. If there really was, would it be someone in the Xiao clan? The Xiao clan would not have needed to do this. But if it was someone else, why would Xiao Sheng admit his guilt, but not say who had helped him? Xiao Sheng. At that moment, another figure stepped forward. It was Old Man Xiao. He walked towards him, and when he looked at him, he sighed inwardly. With all that Xiao Sheng had done, it would be impossible to obtain a pardon for him. Now all he wished for was that he could live. If there was someone else involved in this, tell me who it was, said Old Man Xiao. He knew everything that had happened. It was definitely not something that Xiao Sheng could have done, but he knew that Xiao Sheng had done it. But now Xiao Cheng had admitted his guilt, which implied that Yi Futian's suspicion was not without reason. He also wanted to know who it was. Now Xiao Sheng had to speak. It was only a matter of time. If he did not confess, Yi Futian would not agree to spare him, nor would Xia Qingyuan. Xiao Sheng looked at Old Man Xiao, and bowed slightly with his trembling body, saying, I have admitted what I did. I did it all myself. There was no one else. Boom. A bolt of lightning descended from the sky, cutting into Xiao Sheng's body. He spat out a mouthful of blood as endless lightning will swirled around him. If you confess, I will go easy on you. If you don't, you should know that there are those who can make you tell the truth. Yi Futian did not know why Xiao Sheng was being like this. Who was he protecting? Xiao Sheng should understand that Xia Qingyuan had not acted against him before was because of the relationship between them, not because it was inconvenient to do so. And now that he had admitted his guilt, how could Xiao Sheng not tell the truth under the ministrations of all the cultivators of Emperor Xia's palace? The person behind Xiao Sheng was much more sinister than him. Yi Futian could not let him go. Xiao Sheng knew that Yi Futian was telling the truth. He could not conceal this forever. Powerful cultivators would have ways of making him talk. But from the moment he had made this decision, everything had been predetermined. Nothing could be changed. He looked at Yi Futian, then at Xia Qingyuan, and said, Yi Futian, I hope that you can serve the princess with all your strength. You will do that which I hope to do, but never could much better than me. Yi Futian frowned. What did he mean by that? At that moment, his face suddenly changed. Before him, Xiao Sheng's body suddenly blackened. His whole face suddenly seemed to have countless dark lines flowing over it. Not only that, but they covered his arms and his body as well. His vitality drained away with frightening speed. There was almost no more chance for him to talk. Suddenly, jade green vines spread out from Yi Futian towards Xiao Sheng and wrapped around him. Suddenly, jade green vines spread out from Yi Futian towards Xiao Sheng and wrapped around him. They had a powerful breath of life within them. They poured into Xiao Sheng's body, but Yi Futian found that as soon as they did, they turned black. Corroded and withered, their vitality peeled away. And there were even dark lines stretching out towards Yi Futian. Yi Futian cut the vines and saw that Xiao Sheng was covered in a dark fog. His whole body had turned black. Xiao Sheng, Old Man Xiao, Xiao Qianhe, and the other members of the Xiao clan had all gone pale. They tried to rush forward, but Xiao Sheng's body was already descending to the ground. There was no breath of life left within him. His life force had been completely cut off. He was dead. Below them, everyone's eyes were fixed on where they were, staring at Xiao Sheng's corpse as it fell. He was dead. Yi Futian had not even done anything, and Xiao Sheng had still died? They all trembled on the inside. They finally understood. No wonder Yi Futian had come here with so much force. It looked like he was already sure about many things. He did not know who was helping Xiao Sheng. And had Xiao Sheng killed himself? Or had he been killed? But no matter if he had done it actively or passively, Xiao Sheng had known everything. He had calmly met his death. He knew that since things had come that far, Yi Futian would never let him go. Even if he agreed to spare his life, he would take something to pay Xia Qingyuan back with. He had collaborated with people from Emperor Li's realm and attacked the greatest contributor to the victory at the Battle of Empty Realm. Even if he didn't die, he would be reduced to a mediocre and unambitious life. To a cultivator, that would be even more miserable than death. Especially to a cultivator who had touched the Saint Plane. Xia Qingyuan's figure flashed, and she appeared in front of Xiao Sheng, a slightly ugly look on her face. At that moment, she was extremely conflicted. Xiao Sheng had died like this. He had obviously been hiding his maliciousness, but she did not know if he had actively done this, or if he had been led into it. But no matter which it was, Xiao Sheng had known all along. He had let someone plant poisonous seeds within him, leading him to this violent death. Yi Futian descended beside Xiao Sheng. Behind him, Zhuge Mingyue said, Linger and Phoenix were poisoned as well. This was clearly the work of the same person. This person must be a powerful cultivator. Even using someone else, he had almost managed to kill Linger and Phoenix with poison. And in the end, Emperor Xia had gotten involved. Not to mention, Xiao Sheng had let them plant toxins within him, causing his death. Linger's admirer had probably died in that same way, but the difference was that he probably did not know he was being poisoned. In his prime, Xiao Sheng could maybe have resisted him for a bit, but under Yi Futian's attacks, he was extremely weak. He had lost the power to resist the poison's infection, and so he had died to the poison in an extremely short period. But even so, it was still evident that the poison was powerful. Princess Xia Qingyuan, are there any powerful saint-level cultivators who are skilled with poison? Asked Yi Futian. The person who did this was powerful, and was outside the control of Emperor Xia's realm, so they must be someone famous. There are many poison saints, but I can't think of who it might be. I looked into the affair with Linger and Phoenix, but haven't reached a conclusion yet. Moreover, since he dared to use poison, it must be someone who is hidden very well, answered Xia Qingyuan. Yi Futian was silent. He naturally understood what Xia Qingyuan meant. Since Xiao Sheng was only one of the participants, there must be someone else behind him. This person must be very skilled, much more so than Xiao Sheng. He acted meticulously, and did not make mistakes. If he had not forced Xiao Dong to act, There would not be enough evidence to prove anything now, like a knot that could not be untied. What was more frightening was that every incident seemed to be just a pure coincidence. If he had really died in Dali Dynasty, then everything would have ended there. There would have been no disturbance in Emperor Xia's realm, just as if the people of Dali Dynasty had uncovered his identity, and he had been killed. Qingyuan. Old man Xiao stood before Xiaosheng. A faint sense of sorrow could be detected from him. Among the juniors of the Xiao clan, Xiaosheng was the most talented. Previously, he had been the most cherished disciple of the third generation, and now he had become a saint. He had once again given everyone high hopes, but had come to a tragic end like this. He had admitted his guilt and been executed by poison. Moreover, this turmoil would certainly drag in the whole Xiao clan. Even though due to Queen Zhao's status, Emperor Xia's palace would not do anything against them. But what had happened, and they could not pretend like it had not. The people of Emperor Xia's palace knew it for sure, as did the powerful forces of Emperor Xia's realm. After today, the Xiao clan would still be a powerful family, but they could not continue to advance. Old Man Zhao's banquet had probably been the height of their glory, unless a miraculous figure appeared in the Xiao clan, giving them a chance to fight back. Of course, this all presupposed that the Xiao clan had nothing to do with Xiaosheng's actions. Otherwise, they would be dragged in, and the turmoil would be far from over. Xia Qingyuan looked up at Old Man Xiao and heard him say, Xiaosheng was involved in this affair, and how he has paid the price. But I promise you that the Xiao clan had nothing to do with this. I will help you investigate this. If I find out who else was involved, I will not let them escape. Although his heart was filled with sorrow, he still had to show this kind of attitude. He was furious at the one who had helped Xiaosheng and made him take this drastic step, and who had dragged the Xiao clan into all of this. If it were truly someone from the Xiao clan, he would certainly not let them go. Xia Qingyuan nodded slightly. Although the things that Xiaosheng had done were terrible, he had paid the price for them. But the person who was acting in the shadows was even more contemptible. Xiaosheng was not powerful enough to have arranged all of this. So it must have been the one working behind the scenes who had done it. Their skill was so great that even she was shocked. It had been such a long time, and they had still not made a mistake. When Xiaosheng had died, all the threads had been severed. Yi Futian stood there silently. Many people from the Xiao clan were looking at him furiously, especially Xiaosheng's father, Xiao Qianhe. No matter what Xiaosheng had done, he was still his son. He had become a saint, and should have had a limitless future. But he had come to grief instead. Xiaosheng may have done some things that he should not have done, but he had not really wanted to collude with Emperor Li's realm. He just wanted Yi Futian to die. That was all. And now he had been hounded to death by Yi Futian. Before, no one could have imagined that a junior cultivator of Emperor Xia's realm could kill Xiaosheng and even weaken the Xiao clan. Given the Xiao clan's power, even an exceptionally talented junior cultivator would not be able to disturb them in the slightest. And even if they wanted to kill him, so what? But Yi Futian had been able to ruin them due to his outstanding talent, which could not be found anywhere else in Emperor Xia's realm. Even when he went to antagonize the Dali dynasty, he had had a meteoric rise. Yi Futian turned and left. He felt that the Xiao clan had not been involved. It was only Xiaosheng who hated him, and Old Man Xiao was not that stupid. But he still had to investigate. Xia Qingyuan would continue to search for more clues. Xia Qingyuan looked at the people from the Xiao clan, then at the retreating figure of Yi Futian. Then she turned around indifferently and followed him, whispering, "What are you planning to do next?" Yi Futian kept walking, and his fellow palace members followed him. They left with Xia Qingyuan. Below, countless people watched the two of them walking side by side. There seemed to be a particular meaning to this scene. There were countless cultivators in the vast Emperor Xia's realm, but none of those in the same generation as her had the right to stand beside Xia Qingyuan, except perhaps for that white-haired youth. Yi Futian did not think too much about it. When he heard what Xia Qingyuan asked, he was silent for a while, then answered, "Princess, previously, I wanted to seize Xiaosheng by force and wrest the answers from him. But now he is dead. As for clues, We only know that it was a saint-level cultivator skilled in the art of poison. But you already said that we could not find such a man. So there is only one clue left. What clue is that? Asked Xiaqing Yuan. Saint Shihua, said Yi Futian. We've already proved that what happened to Linger wasn't just a coincidence. Saint Shihua chose that time to suddenly take revenge on the Holy Ji Palace. But you said that it was only a casual attack. And then they fled. They had no determination at all. So someone must have been directing things behind the scenes. If it weren't for the things that Linger and Phoenix had encountered, no one would have suspected that there was someone behind the scenes pulling strings. After all, vengeance would have been served. But looking back on it now, things weren't so simple. Everything had probably been to test whether he was there or not. Saint Shihua has had people watching you all along. They must have had a part in this. Let's grab them, said Xiaqing Yuan. They are still in the 9 states now, lying low and cultivating in the endless sea. Excellent, we will go there, said Yi Futian. The endless sea was vast. It was indeed a good place to hide from the world and cultivate. If it had not been for Xiaqing Yuan having people watch them, it would not have been easy to find them. In the sacred war of the 9 states, the great holy lands had laid siege to the Holy Ji Palace. The palace had taken heavy casualties. This was all set off by Saint Shihua. At that time, the only enemy of the Holy Ji Palace had been the great Zhou Sacred King. Saint Shihua had entered and allied with the great Zhou Sacred Dynasty, and afterward, the Hall of Holy Light and Jixing Cliffs had gotten involved as well. As for the palace itself, a terrible holy war had broken out there, and Jieyu had died. Now Saint Shihua was involved in these matters once again. Old debts and new debts would have to be paid back together. The group continued forward towards Emperor Xiao's palace. A great matrix for sending people directly to the 9 states was there, which would speed things up considerably. Not long after, Yi Futian, Xiaqing Yuan, and the others activated the matrix, and amidst a swirl of light, the whole group disappeared from the upper worlds. The sky above the endless sea was as blue as the water. One could not see the end of it in a single glance. The wind and waves howled as a beam of powerful light descended. A group of people was coming from the sky. There were countless islands in the endless ocean. There were countless islands in the endless ocean. Among these islands were many island cities of various sizes. In the eastern portion of the endless ocean, there was a small unknown island. People were scarce here, with a population of 100,000 or so. On the mainland of the 9 states, this would amount to only a small village. At that moment, on the eastern edge of the island, an old man was wearing a long robe, sitting peacefully on the rocks fishing. He had a plaited bamboo hat on his head, under which his face was sharply angled. He had his eyes closed as if he were dozing off. I see you've come here fishing again, old Shi, called another dark-skinned old man from not far off with a smile. He was getting ready to go out into the ocean to hunt monsters. There were countless sea monsters in the endless ocean, and each of them had many cultivation resources. Since these resources were extremely scarce in this island, these sea monsters were the only source of them. The old man, who was sitting there with his eyes closed, nodded slightly. He opened his eyes lazily, then smiled at the other old man and said, "You're getting ready to go out into the ocean? I can see that there are huge waves out there. There must be a big monster out there causing trouble. Why don't you stay in today?" "That's no problem. My son and my son-in-law are quite powerful cultivators. If we run into a fierce monster, that will be excellent." The old man spoke clearly and honestly. He seemed to be very proud of his children. There were several other people behind him. One of them was shirtless, and his skin was dark all over. He was very strong. The other 2 people were a couple, both of them seeming very fierce. People's appearances could change due to natural processes, or due to cultivation, but they could also do because of environmental effects. "But old Shi, you're probably not going to catch much here. Your disciple looks a bit delicate. He probably hasn't experienced much turmoil. Why don't you let him come out into the ocean with me?" said the old man with a smile as he looked at a figure in the distance. That man was handsome, with fair skin, and not even a trace of aura coming off of him. He seemed to be a scholar. No wonder the old man had said what he did. My disciple is very lazy, so I just let him sit there, said old Shi with a smile. The old man nodded, then brought his son, daughter, and son-in-law into a boat and sailed out onto the sea. They waved to old Shi up on the rocks. When a lone boat went out into the ocean, its fate was determined by heaven. This was a popular saying on the island. As he watched the boat sail away, old Shi whispered, "Sometimes I envy them. They may not know the ways of heaven, but they are still able to smile at everything." The people of the island say that you never know what day you will die, so you should face every moment of your life with a smile. Behind the old man, the young disciple opened his eyes and looked out at the boat. Their environment may dictate their attitude, but it's still a kind of optimism, continued the old man. I have a bad feeling. You two should leave. Another figure walked towards them from a mountain far away. Brother, he said, if you want to leave, you can. I will stay here and accompany our master, said the young man. Old Shi sighed, then looked up into the distance. The sky that had once been as blue as the water was suddenly covered in dark clouds, looking very frightening. The sea was vast, endless, and capricious. It could change its face at any time. How could the people who lived on this small island understand? If I had known that things would turn out like this, I never would have started down this path, whispered old Shi. He had once been a giant in the 9 states. He had mastered all heaven and earth, and his voice shouted commands that could lead to the deaths of thousands. But now, he had fallen to this level all because he had tried to get revenge on a junior. Was there anything he could say about that? Who would have thought that that junior cultivator was not just exceptionally talented, but was in fact the most talented of his generation? Even since he had gone to the upper worlds, he still commanded the wind and rain. In both the upper and lower worlds, there was no one like him. He vividly remembered the sacred war at the Holy Ji Palace. The youth who gave off dazzling light was still firmly imprinted in his mind. At that moment, he had realized that that man was not simply incredibly talented. And after that, his fate seemed to have been set. But he had not thought that it would happen so fast. The violent wind whipped up huge waves and dark clouds covered the sky. The lone boat floated in the sea and was swept into the storm by a large wave. A terrible monster appeared in the storm. It appeared to be a flood dragon. It rose into the storm as it stared at the few people in the small boat. It opened its mouth as it struck out to swallow them. At that moment, a burst of incomparable majesty descended from the sky, covering the whole area. Everything seemed to freeze and the storm slowed. The dragon looked to the shore in surprise, and a fierce sense of fear could be seen in its giant eyes. It suddenly lowered its proud head. The people in the lone boat watched this scene in surprise. They rose into the air, but it seemed that they had been slowed by something. The dragon before them, and the terrible storm had been slowed as well. It seemed that the area around them had frozen. "Begone, vile beast," came a voice from the sky. In the next instant, the dreadful power dissipated, and the dragon tuned in fear and fled, diving back into the sea. A giant hand descended from the sky and pulled the lonely boat, and the people in it back to shore. When the old man and the others returned to shore, they were a bit shaken. They recovered from their shock and looked at the old man, who had been sitting there fishing. They saw that the bamboo hat he had been wearing had blown off. He stood up straight, not seeming old in the least. There was an overpowering majesty about him. As far as the old man was concerned, he was like a god. And it was not only the old man who had changed. Even his young disciple now had an extremely sharp aura that billowed up to the clouds. Divine brilliance shone from his eyes as he looked up into the sky. The old man and the others knelt to the ground and kowtowed. They did not know what to say. Were they gods? Up in the sky, the clouds had changed color as a suffocating power descended. The old man and the others were still kneeling, but they seemed to feel something and looked up. They saw a group of figures appear like gods in the sky. The two in front were a man who looked heroic and had an incomparable aura, and a woman who, although she wore man's clothing, was still extremely beautiful. To the people from the small island, she was like a goddess. Emperor Xia's daughter was indeed like a goddess to the people of the 9 states in the lower worlds. Those who should come have finally arrived. Saint Shihua sighed in his heart. Ever since the day when the mysterious man had made his threat, He had known this day would come, but he had not expected that Yi Futian would have already become a saint. He was a saint, a supernatural figure. How many years had he been in the upper worlds? The princess had not yet become a saint, and yet he had. "Greetings, Your Highness," said Saint Shihua as he looked up at Xia Qingyuan. The old man who was kneeling on the ground's heart trembled even more fiercely. Those who were like gods in their eyes still needed to greet the ones who had come? Then who on earth were these people who had come from the sky? "Saint Shihua, who ordered you to attack the palace?" said Yi Futian as he looked down on them. Saint Shihua looked up at Yi Futian. There was no trace of disturbance on his face. He seemed very calm. Since he had known this day would come, and had worried about it for a long time, now that the day had truly come, he was unperturbed. "During the sacred war, you ordered people from the palace to destroy Shihua Sacred Mountain. Did I need someone to order me to attack the palace?" answered Saint Shihua calmly. "Yi Futian, there is also something that I would like to know. Who on earth are you?" This was a question that had puzzled him for a long time. Once, Emperor Xia had summoned all the people of the 9 states and forbade them from asking it. But now it no longer mattered. "I am Yi Futian, the palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace in the barren state in the lands of the 9 states, under the rule of Emperor Xia's realm," said Yi Futian clearly. Saint Shihua was stunned when he heard this. Then he smiled and did not ask again. He was Yi Futian, the palace lord of the Holy Ji Palace in the barren state. That was enough. The enmity between them had sprung up from that. Thinking back to when Lu Zong wanted to fight with you, it seems a bit ridiculous now. First it was Saint Ji, then Chess Saint, then finally the great Zhou Sacred King. Who would have thought that you'd mature so quickly? If we had known that you'd have such success after only a few years, perhaps no one would have looked at the barren state as weak, said Saint Shihua with a smile. He spoke casually and seemed incredibly calm. Rain Saint rose into the sky, and a brilliant radiance bloomed from him. His long robe flapped in the wind as divine majesty swept out from him. Dazzling brilliance shone from his eyes. He looked at Yi Futian and said, "Since you are a saint now, I must ask you for a fight." As he said this, he stepped forward towards Yi Futian, who was in the sky. He lifted his hand and made a grabbing motion in the air. Time and space seemed to freeze, becoming solid. It was as if that area had been petrified and became incredibly dense. "Are you up to it?" Yi Futian took a step down and pointed his finger at Rain Saint. As he did so, an incredibly powerful storm of swords swept out, cutting through the air. The tip of his finger descended towards the ground, and a heaven-slaying sword descended, cutting through the power that was freezing heaven and earth. Boom! There was a loud noise as the great path solidified. Countless large stones appeared and formed a wall. They covered Yi Futian, but they were destroyed as he pointed his finger at them. Not only that, but the terrible storm of swords wrapped around Rain Saint. Divine light flowed around Yi Futian, becoming brighter and brighter. The tip of his finger kept descending towards the ground, and the heaven-slaying sword followed it. The air trembled violently as everything was destroyed, and the sword rushed towards Rain Saint. Rain Saint waved his hands, and a powerful defensive force appeared around him, seeming to freeze the air around him. A stone wall made from the divine path appeared, crossing between the heavens and the earth. Yi Futian took another step downward, and his foot pressed down upon the heavens and the earth. He continued to press down with his finger, and suddenly sword will cut through the stone wall, shattering it and piecing through it. There was a crackling sound as golden lightning cut across, and the brilliant sword will slashed into Rain Saint, piercing through his body. In the next instant, brilliant light bloomed from Rain Saint's body. He shattered into countless pieces that disappeared from the face of the earth. He had destroyed a saint with a single finger. He had destroyed a saint with a single finger. Saint Shihua watched the figure disappear in the air. His eye twitched slightly, but he was not as agitated or angered as one might imagine. He calmed down after a momentary flutter in his heart, and he looked at the magnificent figure before him. When Rain Saint had become a saint, Yi Futian was nothing more than a minor figure. He remembered those days. That was when Exahua Sacred Mountain had held the 9 States Forum. Yi Futian, who was still a noble-level cultivator, had brought the destitute people from the Holy Ji Palace in the barren state. After missing so many forums, they had finally come to participate in that one. At that time, the group of people from the barren state was tiny. As far as the people from the other holy lands were concerned, the people from the barren state were unnecessary. He still remembered that they had been seated in the last seats, and they were very unhappy about this, feeling like they had been humiliated. The people of the 9 states had just laughed, and not thought it was anything serious. But later, they had taken first place in the forum, and made everyone else look at them with newfound respect. But even so, the other holy lands still did not really worry about the barren state. How many years had passed since that 9 states forum? The one who was once a noble had slain Rain Saint, upon whom he had once placed such high hopes, and made Saint Shihua accept his fate. If he was not experiencing it himself, he would not have believed it. The old man beside trembled with fear as he watched the scene unfolding in the sky. He and those with him were kneeling on the ground. Everything that had happened today went entirely against what they would have imagined. Before, Saint Shihua had saved them from the storm, and he had seemed like a god then. But in a flash, it seemed like this man, who they looked at as a god, would be killed. What kind of person was the brilliant, incomparable figure in the air? And that woman? Old she had even called her princess. Was this the princess of the 9th heaven? Up in the sky, Yi Futian looked down on them all. He fixed his gaze on Saint Shihua. Whoosh! Another figure rose into the sky. It was Saint Shihua's sworn brother, another saint-level cultivator of Shihua Sacred Mountain. He had been a saint for a long time, but he was still stuck at the first tier of the saint plane. When they had fled from the upper worlds, they had realized that this day might come, and thus they had left a few people behind in the upper worlds. The reason he had not returned, and had hidden away in the endless ocean, was so that his juniors would not be dragged into all of this. Since the outcome of all this was already fixed, there was no reason to struggle. He could face it all honestly. He had understood as soon as he saw Yi Futian kill Rain Saint. Although they were on the first tier of the saint plane, and had been saints for many years, there was still a gap between them that neither time nor level could fill. Some people were destined to stand out from birth. Although Yi Futian had not been a saint for very long, the combat power that he could bring forth was not something that saints from the lower worlds like them could match. After all, they had relied on outside power to become saints. But Yi Futian had been without match in the upper and lower worlds, even before he had become a saint. Save perhaps for Princess Xiaqing Yuan. They even suspected that even Xiaqing Yuan was not as good as Yi Futian. That day at the battle at the Holy Ji Palace, the divine light that he had called forth was like that of an emperor as it covered the world. Yi Futian saw his opponent shoot into the air, and a powerful airflow surrounded him. His sword will whistled as it shrieked through heaven and earth. Xianyuan stepped out, and the sky trembled. He pressed his finger forward, and 10,000 sword wills pierced the sky, shattering everything in their path. Looking down in it, it looked like an endless radiance descending. And right in the middle, there was a giant, holy sword that cut through the sky towards the saint-level cultivator, who had rushed towards Yi Futian. It cut through him, killing him in midair. The second saint-level cultivator had fallen, and it had once again only taken a single attack. Of the 3 saints of Shihua Sacred Mountain, Saint Shihua was the last one left. Saint Shihua was saddened by this. Once upon a time, Shihua Sacred Mountain had dominated the 9 states, and was even slightly stronger than the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty in the eastern state. But because of him, it had all been destroyed by one man. It was a tragedy. He raised his arms and suddenly, there was an incomparably fierce airflow in the sky. A bunch of boulders was pulled out of the ground on the beach as loud booming sounds reverberated. The cliffs seemed to be uprooted, and in a flash, huge boulders were floating over a 100-mile area. The old man trembled as he knelt. His heart went numb as he watched this indescribable scene. Saint Shihua rose into the air, and the countless boulders rose with him, high up into the sky. Yi Futian and the others were still standing calmly in that infinite sky, with brilliant light shining from them. They watched this happening peacefully. Several figures stepped forward, blocking the rest of the group. Yaya's long hair flew in the wind, and countless sword wills descended from her, cutting through the boulders. A huge sword matrix was formed that gave off a frighteningly bright light. Numerous sword shadows seemed to be reflected on Saint Shihua's body. The figures behind Glass Saint and Xia Qingyuan stepped forward, indifferently watching Saint Shihua far below them. Saint Shihua was still moving forward, causing the heavens to tremble. He gave a great cry and shook his hand towards the sky. Everything seemed like it would be buried by his boulders. "Take him," ordered Xia Qingyuan coldly. As she said this, several saint-level figures acted at the same time. Saint Shihua was the last saint of Shihua Sacred Mountain, so naturally he could not be allowed to die. There was a brief but violent burst of combat in the air above the little island, which made the whole island shake. Countless people looked up and watched the short but brilliant battle. In the end, old Shi, who had fished on the cliffs, was captured and taken away, leaving only ruins behind. The man and his family pulled themselves out of these ruins. The waves were beating against the shore, making them shiver from the cold. They looked up into the sky and saw that everyone had disappeared. They were still trembling. What had they just witnessed? This was something they would probably never forget as long as they lived. The Holy Ji Palace in the Barren State could be called the most prestigious holy land of the 9 states at that time. There was none like it. The sacred war had shaken the 9 states. 10 holy lands had participated, which made it a spectacular event. Later, at the Battle of Proving Holiness, the palace had produced 5 saints, which was another spectacular event. This was in addition to Yi Futian's fame. Countless heroes from around the 9 states had rushed to the Barren State, wanting to ask to cultivate at the Holy Ji Palace. Later it was rumored that Yi Futian had helped Emperor Xia achieve victory in the Battle of Empty Realm, making him a highly regarded figure. The saints of the Holy Ji Palace had brought 10 sacred methods to the lower worlds and taught them to the core disciples of the palace. Even Moon Saint of the Yu clan had sent the most talented juniors of his clan to the Holy Ji Palace. This showed how outstanding they were. Since there were too many cultivators who came seeking admittance to the palace, they had to raise the threshold for acceptance. Their disciples were getting more and more outstanding, and in these few short years, many heroes had emerged. At that moment, the palace was bustling as many of the disciples were there cultivating. In the air above the palace, a burst of divine power suddenly descended. Everyone faintly felt it, and looked up into the sky. Dozhan walked out of the palace and looked up as well. He saw a brilliant light coming down, and then a group of figures descended from the sky. The 2 people at their head were heroic and magnificent. It was Yi Futian and Xia Qingyuan. There were many cultivators behind them, as well as a wounded Saint Shihua. "The palace lord has returned." Everyone looked up into the sky and called out greetings. Yi Futian had become the symbol of the Holy Ji Palace, the thing they set their hopes on. "Welcome, Palace Lord." Everyone bowed in Yi Futian's direction, overlooking Xia Qingyuan beside him. In the past, this would have been unthinkable. Given her status, she should be the most respected person everywhere she went. But Yi Futian was unequaled within the palace. None could match his prestige, not even Princess Xia Qingyuan. He had once fought with everything he had to save the palace. He was undefeated in the sacred war, and had built up the palace's current glory. Yi Futian nodded to everyone, then walked towards Dozhan calling out, "Master." Dozhan stared at Yi Futian for a bit, then smiled and said, "You've become a saint, Palace Lord." Yi Futian nodded. Suddenly everyone in the palace was shaken. The Palace Lord had become a saint. No wonder his bearing was so magnificent. Many of his disciples had felt that something was different. The Palace Lord had finally stepped onto the divine path. And Saint Shihua, who had once launched a surprise attack on the Holy Ji Palace, had been captured. Everyone looked at the wounded, dejected figure behind Yi Futian, and their hearts were filled with many emotions. It was Saint Shihua, who had once been the Lord of Shihua Sacred Mountain, and before whom the Holy Ji Palace had once been insignificant and easily crushed. Now he had been captured by the Palace Lord, and brought back to the palace. Such was the modern Holy Ji Palace. Who could resist them? "Keep doing what you were doing before," said Yi Futian to the people of the palace. He brought those who had come with him into a hall. Saint Zhang's figure flashed over, bringing Little Butterfly and Su Chehan with him. A bright smile appeared on Little Butterfly's face when she saw that Yi Futian had become a saint. Elder, called Yi Futian. Palace Lord, called Saint Jiang. Greetings, Princess, he said to Xia Qingyuan. Xia Qingyuan nodded slightly. Beside her, Yi Futian said, I need you to help me interrogate someone, Elder. Saint Jiang naturally knew what Yi Futian meant. He looked at Saint Shihua. Will you really humiliate me so, Yi Futian? Asked Saint Shihua. Yi Futian ignored him, but Dozhan said coldly, You must have forgotten what you did. If he is not willing to talk, then make him wish he was dead, said Yi Futian coldly. If he didn't talk, would that be enough? Please, Princess, grant me a boon, said Saint Shihua to Xia Qingyuan. He was Saint Shihua. How could he be humiliated like this? I know that you have sons in the upper worlds, and I already have people watching him. I will do all I can to guarantee their safety. If someone is secretly threatening you, now they won't dare to act against them, said Xia Qingyuan. She guessed what Saint Shihua desired. Saint Shihua's face paled, and he felt powerless. He sighed and said, Princess, if I tell you all that I know, it will still be meaningless. He did not know the identity of the man they sought. He could only be sure that none of this was a coincidence. It had all been deliberately planned. Saint Shihua finally talked. He had no other choice. Saint Shihua finally talked. He had no other choice. Right now, it was not just Yi Futian who wanted to get payback on him. Princess Xia Qingyuan had brought others with her. There was no escape. There was an area in the Holy Ji Palace where there were usually very few people. The area was filled with tombstones, and names were carved onto each one. These were the names of cultivators of the Holy Ji Palace who had died in battle. Saint Shihua was escorted there, and was placed on a punishment platform in the middle of all the tombstones. He knew what was about to happen. His face grew extremely pale. Many people from the Holy Ji Palace gathered there, standing behind Yi Futian. They all looked very solemn. As Saint Shihua was escorted to the platform, chains appeared out of thin air. They were locked onto his body, and even directly penetrated his bones, making him unable to stand up firmly. Kneel, said Yi Futian coldly. Yi Futian, no matter what I've done, I was still once the lord of Shihua Sacred Mountain, one of the titans of the 9 states. You've captured me now, so if you want to kill me, go ahead. Why must you humiliate me like this? Saint Shihua snarled. Would he kneel to be punished and then killed? No, he was Saint Shihua, the hegemon of the eastern state. You instigated the alliance between the great Zhou Sacred King and Saint Ji, which caused the sacred war of all the holy lands of the 9 states. Many people died because of this. Even 1,000 deaths would not be punishment enough for this. What does who you are and your status have to do with anything? Said Yi Futian calmly and coldly. Kneel and confess. As he said this, a terrifying sword shrieked past, cutting into Saint Shihua's legs at the knees. His bones snapped as he knelt to the ground. His face twisted as he looked at Yi Futian in fury. Princess, I once held Shihua Sacred Mountain in the eastern state in His Majesty's name. How can you let this happen? He roared. You were defeated and fled Shihua Sacred Mountain without any regard to your honor. What right do you have to call yourself Saint Shihua? Said Xia Qingyuan indifferently. A group of figures appeared above Saint Shihua. They were Dozhan, Su Shang, Zhuge Qifeng, and the other saints of the barren state. The divine power within them spread out, and a terrible destructive power descended upon Saint Shihua's body. Today, Saint Shihua's blood would be sacrificed to those who had died at the Holy Ji Palace. All the disciples of the Holy Ji Palace gathered together, staring at the scene before them. All of them appeared extremely solemn. Those among them who had experienced several sacred wars all had red eyes. There were many tears, especially from the older people whose feelings ran deeper. Those great wars had been so tragic. The first time, the great Zhou Sacred King had led a great army to attack the palace, threatening to destroy it. At that time, Dozhan had faced the divine catastrophe, not fearing for his own life. To win the battle and ensure the safety of the palace, and giving them a chance to recover. This had lasted until the outbreak of the most tragic of all the sacred wars, in which the palace lord's wife, Hua Jiyu, had died. Even though it had been many years since, when they thought back to it, it was like it was happening right before their eyes. They would never forget. Those who had entered the palace later knew of this too. Although the palace was now in its golden era, these events had all become legendary, and every person newly admitted to the palace memorized this piece of history. Now, as they gathered in the cemetery, they were struck by emotion, and all looked very solemn. Terrifying divine light fell upon Saint Shihua's body, just like the light of the divine catastrophe. Shihua looked up at everyone angrily. His eyes were bloodshot. Were they really going to let him die in such a humiliating way? He had waited for this to happen peacefully. He had prepared himself for death. But Yi Futian would not let him die peacefully. He would first carve Saint Shihua's name onto the barren state's pillar of shame. Kill him, spat Yi Futian. Suddenly, the 5 palace lords of the barren state launched devastating attacks at the same time. The sky looked like the end of days was coming as terrible power shot down, piercing right through Saint Shihua's head. Saint Shihua's body trembled violently. His eyes were open wide, still showing his humiliation and unwillingness to die like this. He roared as blood poured from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. But the destructive attacks continued to fall on him. This was his punishment. In this way, the life of Saint Shihua, who had once dominated the eastern state, was brought to an end. The life force of a saint-level cultivator was powerful, and so Saint Shihua struggled for a long time. But his life force was eventually completely exhausted. His body fell to the ground slowly, and became a corpse. A hegemonic figure had died in the cemetery of the Holy Ji Palace. He was still kneeling there as he died, his head bowed in confession, and his body chained to the tombstone. It was an extremely miserable way to go. Yi Futian watched this all happen calmly. He had no sympathy, no pity. This was the punishment that Saint Shihua deserved for all he had done. Someone behind Yi Futian handed him a glass filled with wine. He dropped the wine glass in front of the cemetery, and then bowed to all the tombs. The barren state was not like it had been before, and the Holy Ji Palace even less so. The Holy Ji Palace would one day become the greatest power in the 9 states, an unmatched holy land for cultivation. Its disciples would cover the earth. The cultivators of the palace, particularly those who had fought in the sacred war, would receive their own cultivation resources, and would have a bright future. But the dead were dead. As far as he knew, they would never see the Holy Ji Palace's current glory, nor would they ever have a way to experience what that glory would bring. Even saying that they had died contently was nothing more than self-consolation. Death was death. There was only one life. As if affected by this emotional atmosphere, all the disciples of the palace bowed along with Yi Futian. All were serious and solemn. If the families of those who died in battle are still here, give them the best cultivation resources, and have them be trained by elders and treated with special favor, said Yi Futian. Don't worry, Palace Lord, we have already done so, Sword Demon said as he and a few others came up to Yi Futian. Yi Futian nodded. This would let him rest a little easier. Now, all that is left is Saint Ji, and the others from the Hall of Holy Light, whispered Yi Futian. He wanted to see how long Saint Ji could hide for. Waiting for death must not be a comfortable thing to do. Let's go. Yi Futian turned to leave, and the people of the palace made a path for him. At that moment Yi Futian had a thought. He should pass on the title of Palace Lord. The palace's position in the 9 states was as unshakable as a mountain. No one would be able to threaten them again. Everything was on the right track, and now that he was a saint, it was even more so. The other holy lands would know about what had happened in the upper worlds. And now that Saint Shihua was dead, once he had destroyed the Hall of Holy Light, he would no longer need to be in charge of the Holy Ji Palace. After all, he seldom came back to the lower worlds. The reason he had not abdicated his position was that the palace still needed him. He was a symbol, the symbol of the palace. Yi Futian looked at Dozhan beside him. Other than here, 5 other palaces had been established by the Holy Ji Palace. Master Dozhan commanded the Central Palace, and he had once been the master of Battle Sage Palace, which was second only to Holy Sage Pavilion. If he were to step down, his master would be the most natural choice to succeed him. He had always believed in the Holy Ji Palace. As for what went on in the upper worlds, although Saint Shihua had come clean, he was farther from the end of this matter than he had thought. Saint Shihua had known too little. He only knew that a mysterious person had sought him out and made him get involved. But he did not know who this person was. Moreover, they were good at hiding and being unpredictable. They had arranged everything seamlessly. All that they were sure about now was that someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. They had already known this, so it was not too important. They still had not found any key evidence. It could be said that there were no flaws to be found in their opponent's plan. When Saint Shihua was hiding in the upper worlds, I had people watching him, but he was in contact with too many people. After so long, it would be impossible to have all of them watched. Our opponent is skilled at hiding his identity and can even conceal his saint-level aura. It may be impossible to find him now, said Xia Qingyuan. Yi Futian nodded slightly. Now we can only rely on conjecture and the process of elimination. Think, Princess, how many people in the upper worlds of Emperor Xia's realm could play this sort of game? Xia Qingyuan looked at Yi Futian. She naturally knew what he meant. Who could arrange everything so secretly, not leaving any holes, and make an alliance with Xiao Sheng that he did not dare to divulge? There were not many in Emperor Xia's realm who could do this. Only those at the very top could have such power and skill. When we return, I will investigate this in detail, said Xia Qingyuan. Thank you, Princess, said Yi Futian. These days, Xia Qingyuan was indeed doing a lot for him. News of Saint Shihua's death spread quickly throughout the 9 states. Everywhere, people experienced mixed emotions. Saint Shihua was a hegemon whose fame had once shaken the earth. He had called the Great Zhou Sacred King to attack the Holy Ji Palace in a sacred war. No one could have imagined that in the end, he would be humiliated and killed like that. Nowadays, the Holy Ji Palace made everyone respect it. It was said that Yi Futian had become a saint. On that day, a powerful aura descended upon the Holy Ji Palace in the barren state. Many figures walked out of the palace and heard voices. The Ocean Palace in the Endless Ocean has come to greet Lord Yi. The North Deep in the Endless Ocean has come to greet Lord Yi. The Celestial Cliffs in the Endless Ocean has come to greet Lord Yi. The voices rang out, sounding very humble. Not only had 3 great holy lands come, but their lords had come as well. Their attitude was very respectful, and they trembled with fear. They had finally caved in. They had heard the news that Saint Shihua had been found by Yi Futian on a small island in the Endless Ocean. The people of the island said that Yi Futian had killed a saint with 1 finger. The Yi Futian of today was not like the Yi Futian of the past. They had once submitted to the Holy Ji Palace, but they did this without any sincerity. After all, the enmity left over from the sacred war was still there. Now when they saw how strong Yi Futian was, how could they not feel afraid? They feared that Yi Futian would come to them to settle old scores, and they would come to the same end as Saint Shihua. At the Holy Ji Palace, many cultivators looked up into the void. At the Holy Ji Palace, many cultivators looked up into the void. They knew that this was because the lords of the 3 holy lands of the Endless Ocean got scared and came to visit preemptively. The deaths of the 3 great saints of Shihua Sacred Mountain, especially the death of Saint Shihua, seemed to have had a huge impact on the 9 states, and with great rippling effects. Go to the palace cemetery and repent for 3 days, Yi Futian said. When the lords of the 3 holy lands of the Endless Ocean heard this, they were stunned. There was no preaching, just the 1 sentence. Let them repent by themselves. This kind of directness was difficult for them to get used to, but soon, they took a deep breath of relief. Still their hearts were conflicted. Yi Futian did not see them, and it seemed to be a gesture of slight disrespect. But they had vowed to submit to the Holy Ji Palace and swore loyalty to Yi Futian. Moreover, it was unrealistic to say that Yi Futian did not hold any resentment against them. In doing so, Yi Futian probably wanted to put an end to the matter. Henceforth, the storm of the sacred war was now ended with no further repercussions. If so, repenting for 3 days, though somewhat humiliating, was not a big deal. After all, given Yi Futian's position today in the 9 states, traveling to the lower worlds with the Princess Xia Qingyuan personally accompanying him, this was not usual treatment for someone from the 9 states. Even the highly respected Saint Xia had to pay respect to the little princess when he saw her. In the land of the 9 states, who could walk shoulder to shoulder with the little princess? Only Yi Futian of the barren state. What was the status of Yi Futian in the past? And what was the status of Yi Futian today? And what would be the status of Yi Futian in the future? Once the 3 thought about that, they looked at each other and replied, yes. After that, they stepped out and headed toward the cemetery, prepared to repent. At this time, from a palace, Yi Futian stepped out. Here Dozhan Yuqi, Zhuge Qifeng, and the others were all here. Yi Futian walked to the front of the staircase and looked down at the vast land of the palace beneath. Lifting his head, Yi Futian looked up at the sky, where a battle of destruction took place once. Many cultivators of the Holy Ji Palace had perished, which also ruined the Holy Ji Palace. Now that Great Zhou Sacred King had died, and Saint Shihua, the culprit, had received his just punishment, should all this be over? After a long period of silence, Yi Futian said, all these years the 9 states was in chaos. I put an end to the 3 great holy lands. Although the Holy Ji Palace has now risen, the land of 9 states has suffered a setback, especially the eastern state. Dozhan and the others listened quietly without saying anything. Of all 3 holy lands of eastern state, the Glass Saint was now with Yi Futian. Shihua Sacred Mountain and the Great Zhou Sacred Dynasty had both been destroyed. Sky Saint came and went as he pleased, without belonging to any place. It had indeed fared the worst. The old palace lord hopes that the Holy Ji Palace will be strong and become a holy land to pass on our crafts in the barren state. Now that the first step has been completed, Master and all you elders will complete the rest, Yi Futian said. Futian. Of course, Dozhan and the others understood the meaning behind Yi Futian's words. It seemed that he had an intention to resign. Futian, you have to know that whether you are at the Holy Ji Palace or not, even if you are cultivating outside, you carry the belief of the palace, as long as you keep the title of the palace lord, Dozhan said. Dozhan is right. As for the day-to-day stuff, you can leave them to your master, Yuqi added. In the past few years, although I bear the title of the palace lord, it was the master and the elders who took care of the palace. There would be no Holy Ji Palace if it were not for all of you. Strictly speaking, it is not I who made the Holy Ji Palace, but it was the palace that achieved my reputation. Yi Futian shook his head. Now, everything should return to their rightful place. I am an incompetent palace lord, but I will do the last bit of things I can for the 9 states for the palace. Dozhan and everyone looked at Yi Futian. It seemed that Yi Futian had already made up his mind. At this moment, Yi Futian looked into the distance and said softly, Master, I'm troubling you to go to all the holy lands in the 9 states, and invite them to come to the Holy Ji Palace in Barren State. The Holy Ji Palace will host a feast to discuss the planning of the grandest martial arts event in the land of 9 states that will surpass the 9-state forum. This competition belongs to the cultivators of the Sage Plain. At that time, I will invite the princess to participate in the discussion, and I hope that this competition will open up the communication between the upper and the lower worlds. Dozhan and the others trembled inside. All of them were shocked. They vaguely understood what Yi Futian wanted to do. Today, perhaps in all of 9 states, only Yi Futian could have done it. Even Saint Xia couldn't do it. In this land of 9 states, only he could really influence the princess. Very well. Dozhan took a deep breath, and then nodded in earnest. If this could happen, it would indeed be a great contribution to the land of 9 states, and it would make the spirit of martial arts in the 9 states that much stronger. Others also nodded earnestly. If Yi Futian could have this ambition, they were naturally willing to work together for this. This event must be widely spread, and have participants from all over, and all of the 9 states will need to be informed. Yi Futian continued. In addition, pass my order on to the Hall of Holy Light of Qi State, and tell them I also invited the Hall of Holy Light to join us in this event. The Hall of Holy Light is also a part of the 9 states, as long as those who participated in the war are willing to come to apologize and repent for their past wrongdoings. Futian, will no longer look to the past, and the Hall of Holy Light is still one of the holy lands in the 9 states. There is only one person I will not forgive, Saint Ji, Lord of the Hall of Holy Light. Saint Ji was one of the culprits of the sacred war. All the others could be forgiven and their pasts forgotten, except for Saint Ji, who initiated the sacred war. He would never be forgiven. Of course, the premise was that those who participated in the war must come to apologize and plead guilty and repent in the cemetery. Dozhan and the others, as they looked at Yi Futian, who stood there alone with his back facing them. After the initial shock, a smile appeared in their eyes. Yi Futian today was a saint. Yes, Palace Lord. Everyone took their orders then retreated. Soon, they all stepped into the void, heading out for all the places within the 9 states. Soon, the news spread throughout the 9 states. Yi Futian had summoned all the holy lands in the 9 states. The Holy Ji Palace of Baron State would hold an unprecedented grand event. In a short time, the 9 states responded, and all the major holy lands had responded, saying that they would go to the Baron State to participate in this grand event. The Baron State, once again, attracted worldwide attention and became the focal point of 9 states. Within the 9 states, countless people set off to the Baron State, wanting to witness this great spectacle. Many people had said that this event would be the most spectacular event of the 9 states in decades. As the appointed day approached, in the land of the Summer State, Saint Xia had set off, and Saint Li of the 9 State College had also departed. Of course, there was also Moon Saint. Holy lands, such as War State Vajra region, Holy Temple of 10 Corners, began to set off one after another. In Qi State, the Lord of the Qi clan personally led his group there, and the same with Jixia Holy Palace and Yu House. Only the atmosphere of the Hall of Holy Light seemed a little peculiar. In the past few years, the development of the Hall of Holy Light had been rather fast, and it had become one of the top 5 holy lands in the 9 states. Saint Ji, the Lord of the Hall of Holy Light, ranked 5th on the saint ranking. For a time, he was at the top of the world, dominant and sharp, his force about to surpass that of the Qi clan, the longtime top holy land in Qi State, and Jixia Holy Palace. However, after the Sacred War, Saint Ji was put under house arrest, and the Hall of Holy Light was continuously guarded by the Holy Light. He dared not relax for one moment. The grand matrix of Holy Light protection of the Hall of Holy Light was finally opened. The cultivators of the Hall of Holy Light successively walked down and left, actually going toward the direction of the Holy Ji Palace in Baron State. This was a situation that no one could have foreseen. In the Hall of Holy Light, there was a main hall, high above the sky. Standing at its edge, one could overlook the entire vastness of the Hall of Holy Light. At this moment, Saint Ji stood there, watching the flow of the crowd below. That cultivators of the hall stepped out and left, one after the other. There were fewer and fewer people, and he stood there watching. As the people at the Hall of Holy Light decreased day by day, watching many bowed to him and paid their respect before leaving. Until there was no one else left, the once glorious Hall of Holy Light now seemed extremely quiet. At a glance, there was hardly anyone in sight. The main hall that disappeared into the clouds seemed particularly lonesome, and his figure seemed even more desolate. Today must be the day that Yi Futian is holding the feast. Saint Ji looked into the distance and murmured, "Yes, Lord." Behind Saint Ji, an old manservant stood there quietly. It was an old man who had watched Saint Ji grew up many years ago. His hair was completely white. "Uncle Han, was I wrong?" Saint Ji asked. "My lord, in this world, there is no absolute right or wrong," the old man whispered softly. "Why did the people of the Hall of Holy Light all choose to leave?" Saint Ji asked again. "This is human nature. Not to mention, the lord of the Holy Ji Palace, Yi Futian, was able to let go of the grievances of the Sacred War. He is a man of stature. It is not surprising that the people of the hall would go down to join him. My lord should not blame them," said the old man. "Yes," Saint Ji nodded. "I thought I would wait for his revenge, But I didn't expect him to let it all go instead. And now that he is holding the event of a lifetime in the 9 states, not only trying to promote the Holy Ji Palace of Barren State, but also to promote the 9 states, I am a far lesser man than him, in terms of spirit and aspiration. The old man stood quietly and said nothing. Saint Ji smiled and said, "It's been quite a few years, and it's time for me to get out and take a walk." "Lord." The old man looked up at Saint Ji. Emperor Xia was the one who personally issued the house arrest on Saint Ji. Whoever dared to disobey the order of Emperor Xia was unlikely to live. Since he could have such generosity in his heart, I hope not to hinder the Hall of Holy Light from now on. As Saint Ji's words fell, a boundless radiance darted into the sky from his body, and then his body turned into light and rushed into the sky above. An era has ended. Saint Ji's voice spread through the Hall of Holy Light. He disappeared after he rushed out of the hall. Since then no one in the 9 states had seen Saint Ji. Some people claimed that he had died, executed by Emperor Xia. Some claimed that he was taken by the people of Emperor Xia. This became a mystery in the 9 states. Contrary to the bleakness of the Hall of Holy Light, this day at the Holy Ji Palace of Barren State, there was an unparalleled feast that would affect the future of the 9 states. At this feast, Yi Futian announced that in the future land of the 9 states, the 9-State Forum, that was to be held once every 3 years, would not only be open to those below the sage plane, but that sages could also participate. Moreover, the principalities of the upper world would come down to the lower world, and chose the best of them to be brought to the upper world to cultivate. Princess Xia Qingyuan had promised. All of the 9 states were shocked. Of course, there was something else that was even more shocking. Yi Futian announced that he would step down as the lord of the Holy Ji Palace of the Barren State, and that the new palace lord was to be Saint Dozhan. This turbulent era had finally come to an end. Cottage Villa, in the upper world of Emperor Xia's realm, had made many new acquisitions. Cottage Villa, in the upper world of Emperor Xia's realm, had made many new acquisitions. Yi Futian had already become a saint, and gained a firm foothold in Emperor Xia's realm. He'd deduced that the last assassination attempt had been meant to get rid of him in the name of Emperor Li's realm. But now that he had returned, the others would not be bold enough to try it again. Without Xiao Sheng as a sacrificial lamb, it would be easier for their scheme to be exposed. Therefore, they had brought some more people from the lower world to the palace. They'd brought with them the 4 senior brothers, Shuiyi, the entire family of Yuxi, Qingxian, Lu Qinyu, and Goddess Wang Yue. Now that the big senior brother was a saint, Goddess Wang Yue would naturally follow him, and they would cultivate together. The cottage villa was quite lively. On a green pasture, Yi Futian sat quietly. In the distance, an elf-like girl ran through the pasture toward him, shouting, "Uncle Yi." Yi Futian opened his arms, and the girl rushed into them. Yi Futian said with a smile, "Little grass, what are you doing here?" "My dad is forcing me to read again, but I have read a lot already, so I need to take a breather," the little girl said seriously and quite precociously. Yi Futian squeezed her cheeks and said, "It's for your own good that your dad asked you to read. It will make it easier for you to cultivate in the future." "What do I need to have such great cultivation for?" Little Grass asked. "To protect yourself," Yi Futian replied. "Aren't you here to protect me?" Little Grass looked at Yi Futian with her big eyes. Yi Futian looked at the girl's innocent eyes, smiled and nodded. "You're right. So I don't need to cultivate so hard in the future, right?" Little Grass continued with her line of reasoning. Yi Futian had no words to refute her. Children nowadays were a lot sharper than he had been at that age. "Uncle Yi, when will Auntie Jiyu come back?" Little Grass asked. Yi Futian was stunned for a moment, speechless and without a response. Then he squeezed out a smile and said, "Soon. But my mom said that Auntie Jiyu is now an angel, and that she has gone back to heaven." Little Grass asked with some bewilderment, "But isn't this heaven?" Yi Futian looked at Little Grass, and was speechless again for a moment. "Uncle Yi, I kinda miss Auntie Jiyu." Little Grass's eyes were slightly reddened. When she was little, Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu had been extremely good to her. Now she was almost grown, but she had never seen Auntie Jiyu again. Was heaven a destination that she would never return from? Little Grass, a voice called out. Yushi was coming toward them. He looked at Little Grass and said, "You are bothering your Uncle Yi again." "It's okay, I was a little bored anyway." Yi Futian smiled and hugged the little girl who was leaning on him and said softly, "Me too, I miss Auntie Jiyu too. One day we will go and find her together." "Really?" Little Grass looked up at Yi Futian. "Sure, when have I ever lied to you?" Yi Futian asked. "Okay then." Little Grass nodded seriously. Yushi watched Yi Futian and felt some sadness. It had been some years now, but Hua Jieyu was still a source of pain in their hearts. For Yi Futian, it must be even worse. Even though he was smiling at the moment, there was no mistaking the faint sadness on his face. Even though he was now a saint, there were still some things and some people that could not be let go of easily. Yushi looked at Little Grass again. The girl was a teenager now, but her mind was extraordinarily innocent. She understood that this was because of the environment where she had grown up. Although Little Grass had experienced a period of turmoil at the palace, because of her age, she had always been protected. Coupled with the fact that she had never gone outside by herself, she lacked practical worldly experience. She had rarely even gone outside of Alchemy City or the Holy Ji Palace. Yi Futian and the other disciples of the cottage were extremely indulgent and fond of her, so it was difficult for her to grow up. "Is there still no news?" Yushi asked softly. Yi Futian nodded slightly. Saint Shihua had not provided much valuable information at all. The only person who might have known the truth, Xiaosheng, was now dead. Along with him, all the clues regarding the matter had been lost. Not even Xiaqing Yuan could obtain too many valuable leads in her investigation. These days, Yi Futian had a better understanding of the many top principalities in Emperor Xia's realm. Although he did not know the truth, he had some hypotheses of his own. However, these hypotheses were unlikely to be confirmed soon. In the past, he dared to go to the Xiao clan to confront Xiaosheng, because he was convinced that Xiaosheng had participated. Although there was no hard evidence, he was still determined to interrogate him. However, this would be more difficult than it had been before. It would probably be impossible to act like that again. Of course, he would not stop forever. But even if he was unwilling, he would probably need to let it go for the time being. Now, many people at the villa had reached the bottleneck of cultivation just below the Saint Plain, especially the third senior brother, Yusheng and Wuchen. They were already at the peak of the sages, within reach of the Saint Plain. The most important thing right now was his hope that everyone would successively enter the Saint Plain. However, sanctification required the right state of mind and opportunity. There was a figure coming out from the sky with a sword. Yi Futian turned his head and saw Qin Zhuang clad in black, standing in front of him. He said, "Yaotai Divine Palace has prepared the Yaotai Divine Feast and sends their invitation." Yaotai Divine Feast, Yi Futian murmured to himself. The Yaotai Divine Feast was the grandest banquet held in the Yaotai Divine Palace. The banquet was always held with great fanfare, as everyone who was anyone in Emperor Xia's realm was invited. However, Yi Futian was not very interested in this, so he said, "Decline on my behalf. Just say that I am busy with cultivation and have no time to attend." People at Yaotai Divine Palace mentioned that Goddess Yaoshi told them specifically that Master Yi should attend. Qin Zhuang insisted. When Yi Futian heard what Qin Zhuang said, he remembered that the woman was stunning beauty, and hesitated for a second. He gave it some thought and nodded, saying, "Very well." Strictly speaking, Yaoshi was a friend. Since she had already told him to attend, he would oblige. He would think of it as taking a short break for some relaxation. Qin Zhuang said nothing more, and turned to leave. In Emperor Xia's realm, the news of the Yaotai Divine Feast had caused quite a stir. Yaotai Divine Palace was the highest power in Emperor Xia's realm. The enchanted island of the west in Emperor Xia's realm was known for its beautiful women and dozens of goddesses. It also gave rise to the top force composed entirely of women. The Lord of Yaotai Divine Palace was known as the Holy Mother of the West, and was also the head of all the saints of the enchanted island of the west in Emperor Xia's realm. She was the most distinguished character in the entire realm. The reputation of her beauty had spread throughout the world when she was young. She was an unusual woman, who was able to compete with Queen Xiao for the title of the first beauty in Emperor Xiao's realm. The Yaotai Divine Feast was not held every year, only once in a blue moon. However, every time the Yaotai Divine Feast was held, it signified a major event happening at Yaotai Divine Palace. Many in Emperor Xiao's realm speculated that this year's Yaotai Divine Feast was being held by Yaotai Divine Palace as an occasion to select a path companion for the current virgin of Yaotai, Yaoshi. Although Yaotai Divine Palace was a principality of female cultivation, it did not reject the idea of path companions. On the contrary, many of the goddesses in Yaotai Divine Palace had path companions and cultivated outside. Even more so, their standard was extremely harsh, and their selected companions were only people of renown. It was said that at Yaotai Divine Palace, there were methods that were suitable for couples to cultivate together. For those who cultivated in Emperor Xiao's realm, many had fantasies about the goddesses of Yaotai Divine Palace. Therefore, those who could succeed were rarer still. This time around, people in Emperor Xiao's realm speculated that it was Yao Shi who wanted to choose a significant other. As the reigning virgin, Yao Shi's beauty was peerless, and many even claimed that she was qualified to compete for the title of the first beauty in Emperor Xiao's realm. Some had even compared her with Princess Xia Qingyuan, so one could only imagine the outstanding beauty she possessed. For this reason, how could the announcement of Yaotai Divine Feast not create a sensation all on its own? Those who received the invitations were the most powerful figures in Emperor Xiao's realm. Ordinary people did not qualify. People from all corners of Emperor Xiao's realm set off for the enchanted island of the west to the Yaotai Divine Palace. Yi Futian was prepared to depart and see for himself. However, before Yi Futian was able to leave, someone came to the cottage villa and appeared in front of him. The man who appeared was the guard of Emperor Xiao's palace. He'd come carrying orders. Saint Yi. The guard greeted Yi Futian with a bow. Now that Yi Futian was sanctified, Yi being his surname, he could be called Saint Yi. If there was no other specific title, Yi Futian nodded and asked, "What message do you bring?" The princess would like to remind Saint Yi that although Saint Yi has already entered the divine path, the road of cultivation will only be more difficult in the future, and cautioned against complacency. There are many methods for cultivation in the Golden Hall of the Lotus that could aid in comprehension and further cultivation, and there are now divine methods of cultivation that Saint Yi might want to visit for further enlightenment. Do not forget and neglect your cultivation, said the messenger. Yi Futian nodded and replied, "Many thanks to the princess." The messenger nodded, but made no motion to leave. Yi Futian looked at him. The messenger looked back at Yi Futian. The atmosphere was slightly ominous. "Is there anything else?" Yi Futian couldn't help but ask when he saw the messenger making no move to leave. "No." The messenger shook his head. Then, Yi Futian saw that the guard looked strange. The guard asked, "So, Saint Yi is not going to the Golden Hall of the Lotus to cultivate?" Yi Futian understands the message of the princess, and will go to visit and cultivate at another time, Yi Futian replied. "Oh." The guard nodded, still showing no intention of leaving. "Then, you may return with my reply," Yi Futian said. "Yes." The messenger nodded, looked deeply at Yi Futian. He finally turned to leave. Yi Futian saw the messenger departing and said to those around him, "We should go now." "Let's go," the black wind condor muttered excitedly. The master was always so authoritative. Better yet, this time, they would go and collect the Virgin of Yaotai. This thought made the black wind condor even more excited. The experience of the past was memorable and, to the black wind condor, downright unforgettable. He had also seen Yaoshi before. Compared to that she-devil in Emperor Xiao's palace, Yaoshi was much gentler. If only Xia Qingyuan knew what the black wind condor secretly thought of her. What would she do with him? She-devil. Among the 8 sacred generals, sacred general Shura, who was the most skilled at offense, was from Shura Palace and enjoyed a great reputation. The reigning palace lord of Shura Palace and sacred general Shura were brothers, he the elder brother. However, it was believed that it was sacred general Shura, whose cultivation was a level higher. The young master of Shura Palace was the son of the palace lord of Shura Palace, and he had a close relationship with sacred general Shura, so his status was considered very prominent. Although the young master of Shura Palace has excellent talents and comes from an impressive family, ultimately, he cultivates in the way of demonic method, and his temperament is cold and cruel. Goddess Yaoshi is as gentle as the water, so she does not necessarily like that kind of man. Someone else added, I am in favor of the romantic man from Hundred Flowers Valley. He is considered to be the most legendary person in the western region in recent years. Many people remembered this person when they heard this. Hundred Flowers Valley was a force composed of goddesses, but a few decades ago, the palace lord of Hundred Flowers Valley had found an orphan and raised him in Hundred Flowers Valley. As a result, he became the only man among the many hundreds of female cultivators there. He was handsome beyond words, his looks even hinting of feminine beauty. His talents were excellent, and he was said to have the most perfect character. It was said that he had already arrived at Yaotai Enchanted Island and would be attending the Yaotai Divine Feast. Don't just focus on the cultivators from the Western Region Temple. In the central area of Emperor Xia's realm, there are many noteworthy characters. In the Jiutian Temple alone, there are countless proud talents, not to mention the many descendants of Master of Jiutian Temple. Any one of them would be extraordinary. There is also the Xianyuan clan, the descendants of Ren Huang, and the swordsmen of Lihan Heaven, and Wang Chuan, whose presence is yet to be determined. What's more, don't forget about the most prestigious person in this generation, a cultivator who could slay the saints as a sage. It was rumored that goddess Yaoshi knew him, and that their relationship was not insubstantial. He was also invited this time. If he comes, I am afraid that those many excellent figures in the Western region will be overshadowed. Don't just build up other people. Is this Yi Futian really that powerful? Someone asked curiously. After all, they had only heard of him and not seen him with their own eyes. This new rising star, since the battle with the Xiao clan, was well known in Emperor Xia's realm. Many others had learned of his name. He was able to defeat Xiao Sheng while in Sage Plain and force his death. How can that be false? Someone asked. You know, Xiao Sheng was not a frivolous character either. Before he became a saint, he was one of the few people in Emperor Xia's realm below the Saint Plain who enjoyed great reputation and recognition as Queen Zhao's nephew. Even so, he was crushed by Yi Futian and was forced to die by his hand. You can imagine what kind of person Yi Futian is. However, many people thought that Yi Futian's endgame would be the little princess. The upper world was vast and endless, but as long as Emperor Xia's palace was involved, it would be a major event. The little princess Xia Qingyuan was an unusual character. Unless they were truly peerless, people rarely struck her fancy. But as her relationship with Yi Futian was a close one, and because Yi Futian had been the only person who could walk shoulder to shoulder with the little princess in all these years, it had caused many to speculate. His Royal Highness, the fifth prince, has arrived. At that moment, a voice was heard in the distance. Many people were stunned. Someone asked, "What was that you said?" From the imperial palace, the fifth prince has come down to Yaotai Enchanted Island, the man said, looking at the space below. Many people trembled in their hearts. Within moments, the news caused great waves of excitement. Had the prince come in person from Emperor Xia's palace? Emperor Xia had 6 children, and the little princess was his youngest child and only daughter. The other 5 were all a lot older than the little princess. The 5 princes were all in the Saint Plain. Now the prince had arrived in person to attend the Yaotai Divine Feast. What would happen? If His Royal Highness the 5th Prince had an idea, and if Yaotai Divine Palace wanted to choose a path companion for Yao Shi, then the prince would undoubtedly be the most promising choice. If she married a prince, she could enter the palace and get to the heart of Emperor Xia's realm. However, some others also thought that Yao Shi, as the reigning virgin, would be the future heiress of Yaotai Divine Palace. If she married a prince, she would have to enter the palace, and Yaotai Divine Palace would lose Yaoshi. The Yaotai Divine Feast seemed to be getting more interesting by the second. Every prominent figure from all corners of Emperor Xiao's realm arrived at Yaotai Divine Palace. The Divine Palace was divided into enchanted islands, which were interconnected into a whole. Looking down from the void, they were extremely beautiful. Visitors from many places were put on different enchanted islands. A mighty procession descended. The head of the group was extremely distinguished, clad in a brilliant robe. From Yaotai Enchanted Island, figures flashed and many goddesses personally came to greet the newcomers. All bowed and said, "Greetings to your Royal Highness." "No need for formalities, goddesses. I came at my father, the Emperor's behest to attend the Yaotai Divine Feast, and am just one of many guests. There is no need for the goddesses to pay so much attention." The fifth prince possessed an extraordinary temper, but his voice sounded gentle and polite like a spring breeze. "Your Royal Highness, please go to the Divine Palace to rest," said the goddess in the lead. The fifth prince nodded slightly, and then followed the goddess to the Divine Palace on the Enchanted Island. He looked around at his surroundings. This place was indeed a spiritual treasure for cultivation. Shortly after the fifth prince entered Yaotai Divine Palace, it caused quite a wave of excitement on the islands. Those who had already arrived from principalities such as Jiutian Temple, Xianyuan Palace, Qin Palace, Tianji Pavilion, and Lihan Heaven had all heard the news. Many people tried to figure out where the fifth prince had settled, so that they could visit him later. After all, he was the descendant of Emperor Xia. Respect must be paid. There was an enchanted island nestled near the Divine Palace, where there were many beautiful pavilions and lofty structures. Between the pavilions, there were many lush and ancient trees. The scenery was incredibly ethereal. A group of people sat in a pavilion under a century-old tree, chatting casually. One of them had a head of white hair and a handsome visage. It was Futian. He had been there for a while, and had been welcomed to rest on this enchanted island. The Yaotai Divine Feast would be held the next day. On the way over, Futian had heard many people mention that the reason for the Yaotai Divine Feast was to select a path companion for Yaoshi, which made Futian speechless. Although Yaoshi was a perfect woman, he had no fantasies about her, and was unclear as to the reason why Yaoshi had deliberately invited him to come. The two hadn't had much contact at all. He could not believe that Yaoshi might have feelings for him. When one reached their age and spiritual state, it was not easy to foster romantic feelings like it was for young adolescents. As mentally stable as they were, it was not very easy for them to move their true emotions, unless it was to choose the right person, rather than on emotional preferences. Then it was more likely. Qin Zhuang came over and said to Futian, "The fifth prince of Emperor Xiao's palace has arrived at the Yaotai Divine Palace." Futian heard Qin Zhuang's words with a touch of surprise. Although he knew that Emperor Xia had 5 sons besides Xia Qingyuan, he had never been in contact with them. After all, Emperor Xiao's palace was immense, and there had been no opportunity for their paths to cross. What puzzled him was, why had His Royal Highness come? Did he prefer Yaoshi's beauty? If it was simply a matter of appearances, Yaoshi was indeed one of the most beautiful women in Emperor Xiao's realm. In the upper world, of all the women he had seen, only Queen Xiao could surpass Yaoshi. As for Xia Qingyuan, who he had never seen dressed as a woman, it was difficult for him to judge. "Let's go and pay him a visit," Futian said as he stood up. Even though they'd had no interactions before, when they ended up in the same place, a visit was still expected. Qin Zhuang nodded. As the group got up and prepared to leave, a voice was heard saying, "Master Yi." The speaker was a peerless beauty. Yaoshi was wearing a long dress today that enhanced her sexy figure to its fullest. Her face revealed a gentle yet charming smile. Master Yi's temperament seemed to have become even more delightful. Since you entered the Saint Plain, you have become even more handsome and extraordinary. Yaoshi's voice was as gentle as the water, and he was moved by her every smile and sound. This was a woman who could satisfy anyone's fantasies without any faults. The goddess flatters me, Futian said. He saw that Yaoxi's temperament had also changed slightly. The feeling of being nearly immortal was even stronger, just like a figure in a painting. It made Futian faintly feel that Yaoxi might be just inches away from the divine path. Was the Yaotai divine feast being held because Yaoxi was about to enter the saint plane? We haven't seen each other for some time. Master Yi seems to be estranged again. Yaoxi swept a playful side glance at Futian, so charming in her every movement that it could make a man drunk with feelings. Futian smiled and shook his head. Yaoxi, I heard that His Royal Highness is here, and we were just about to go and visit. Why don't we go together? His Royal Highness has other people to receive him. How come I have just arrived and Master Yi already can't wait to chase me away? Yaoxi said, joking. Futian still didn't know how to respond. This is Yaotai Divine Palace. How could I drive you away? Futian laughed and said, I am afraid that I would be blown out of the Enchanted Islands. Who would dare to blast Master Yi out of the island? I would certainly not let them get away easily. Yaoxi smiled softly. I heard Master Yi had not planned on coming, and that you finally acquiesced only after being informed that Yaoxi had insisted on your presence. I have just entered the realm of the divine path, and my realm is still unstable. Naturally, I needed to cultivate more. I beg your pardon, Futian responded. The instability of the realm refers to the destruction of the saint. Yaoxi went directly to the heart of the matter. It was in the realm of the sage that you defeated Xiao Sheng of the Saint Plain, and Master Yi's cultivation was quite stable then. It is clear that you did not want to come. Pity. I had always hoped to see Master Yi again. Futian smiled helplessly. Yaoxi, you are going to make me run away with the way you talk. Casual chatting was impossible. Yaoxi laughed softly. She brushed the hair away from her forehead, appearing even more charming and enticing. She looked at Futian and said, Then I won't tease Master Yi. I'll just sit here and we can talk. Of course. Futian nodded. The black-winged condor sat watching next to them, his eyes wide. He looked at Futian, then looked at Yaoxi. It was as if no one else was around. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.